Afternoon. Welcome to today's IOSH webinar. I'm Paul Haxall. I chair the IOSH Construction Group and I'm joined today by Simon Longbottom. Simon is the head of construction policy at the HSE and has had extensive involvement in the process of the revisions to the CDM regulations and also the development of the industry guidance. Before we get into the main body, I would like to just offer my thanks to DWF, who have provided the facilities for us to be hosting this webinar from their London venue. In essence, over the next hour or so, Simon is going to give us a bit of a brief overview of the regulations, and then we want to talk through, in effect, 3 scenarios to try and put the regulations into context in some shape or form, making the point, what we're talking about is a regulatory framework that covers the breadth of the entire industry and therefore does need some interpretation, and it may be that interpretation which can be a challenge to a number of people. So we're happy to take questions. What I would try and encourage is that in order to make the webinar run reasonably smoothly, we address them as blocks of questions so that we can have some time about the construction phase plan, the PD or whatever, rather than random questions back and forth. The webinar is being recorded and it will find its way onto the construction group microsite in a few days. So if there are questions that we don't get to answer, then it is our intent, or it is my intent, I won't let Simon out the room until I've got answers to them all, and then we can add a few lines to the content which goes onto the website so that all the questions, all the queries have been dealt with in some shape or form. So really, on that basis, I'm going to hand over to Simon and let him make a good start. Simon.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Simon Longbottom. I'm head of the construction sector at HSE, and I'm just going to do a little summary, really, of what CDM is all about, what it's trying to achieve, and what gave rise to the current iteration of the regulations. So, just to refresh really on why it is that we changed the regulations. As I'm sure many of you are aware, we do in any case review regulations on a regular basis to see how they're operating and whether they're still fit for purpose. And you'll be aware that there are obviously a number of government drivers. A key one, of course, is that we have an increased productivity from the construction industry and improve its efficiency. And partly underlying that is a move for improved or better regulation, which is in effect moving towards simplification of requirements, trying to take bureaucracy out of the regulatory framework to really focus on risk, to make sure that compliance is proportionate and also that enforcement is proportionate, and that we have consistency in the way that that's approached across the country. Now, when we embarked on the evaluation some years ago now, also some concerns around the complexity of the regulations themselves, but also the supporting improved code of practice. Again, partly because that was leading to bureaucracy, because of the way the ACOP was structured and was trying to cover quite a complex industry in a single publication. So there were a number of things we had to do domestically on that front, but also, of course, we had the European dimension, and there were a number of areas where the temporary Mobile and Construction Sites Directive had not been implemented, and we needed to deal with those. The third point on the slide that you have there is that we have really a two-tier industry, and we'd found that the impact of CDM, although it applied to all projects, all sites, really wasn't having much impact or having the desired impact on smaller sites. And so a lot of what we were trying to do about simplifying the requirements and making them more understandable was aimed at improving performance on some of those smaller projects as well. So next slide just summarises the key requirements of CDM. So just quickly running through those. So we've got really the Robin's philosophy in here is that those who create risk should be managing it, and that means looking at all duty holders throughout the system, so through your clients, designers and your contractors, not leaving everything to be managed on the site. Technical standards in the regulations, of course, remain unchanged. We did seek to strengthen the client role and make that more apparent. We had to introduce the duties on domestic clients to implement the directive, but again, as I'm sure you all appreciate, those domestic client duties are automatically deemed onto those involved in the project. We do, again, another directive requirement is that a construction phase plan is required for all projects, no matter the size. We wanted also to improve the standard of involvement of the workforce, because, again, we have many sites where that really hasn't happened. There are some excellent examples out there, but it's not something that's really improved as we would have liked. There are the changes to the notification requirements. That again aligns it with the directive, and I think that the point about notifications to remember is that none of the duties now are linked to whether a project is notifiable or not. It's a completely standalone requirement. And doesn't link to anything else. We are working with have been working with industry to continue to get the message out. One of the big messages around the regulations is about proportionality, proportionate compliance, and also our approach as the regulator to enforcement. So just outline of the main changes. We have simplified the structure of the regulations. We've put in that greater client responsibility. The domestic clients we've dealt with, changed the CDMC coordinator role to the role of the principal designer. So the principal designer has to be a designer appointed from the existing project team. Competence requirement has been changed so that it focuses on the component parts of competence, so skills, knowledge, experience, and training where it's an individual, and then also organisational capability to where we're dealing with businesses. The construction phase for all projects, as I've already mentioned, and the threshold for importance, threshold for appointments, again, important to appreciate that is determined by whether there are likely to be more than one contractor or not on the site. Notification I've mentioned, so I won't go through that any further. So, what we thought would be helpful, just a summary here of the regulations. So simplified, we hope they're more relevant to small businesses now, small projects. Across the piece, strengthen the client role, coordination function. We've got that embedded in the team. Removal of the exemption for domestic clients, and the removal of a competence, a requirement that's actually expressed in terms of competence. Moving on, we thought it would be helpful perhaps just to structure the discussion a bit by considering 3 different scenarios. I think Paul is just going to just outline what these scenarios are, and then we'll start to take some questions, I think.
Okay, really just trying to put some context in, just picking a couple of scenarios to talk around, to give us some context, give us some illustration. So in order to sort of set that discussion, just going to start talking initially around a factory extension, the kind of thing that might be a small business. It might be a farm, extending a cattle shed, or something that's at the SME end of the sector. So what might that look like? How can we take that forward and be compliant? So it's the kind of thing maybe that could start with a single civils designer, because maybe that's how some of these things have been done in the past, but it then becomes apparent at a later stage as the works unfold that actually the structural frame, the steel work, is being detailed by a structural steelwork contractor as a subcontractor to the principal contractor, and in a similar vein, the M&E, which actually might be fairly limited, it might only be a bit of power and lighting, is being detailed by, again, another subcontractor, in the sense of putting the detail together. So I guess, Simon, if that's a scenario, has the system kind of gone wrong, in the sense that we've got ourselves a scenario where maybe the planning, that wonderful plan, manage, monitor element, which is enshrined in CDM, should come right at the start and generate an understanding, a better understanding of the package of work, to understand then how it should go forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the key thing really is that if you've got a project like this and it's a one-off client, then it's incumbent clearly on the designer that's approached initially to advise that business of what the duties are likely to be under CDM, and make sure they understand the procurement process, that there is a proper brief developed, as is covered in some of the guidance that we produced, and that that business who's come to this for the first time has a good understanding of the process that needs to be gone through, which of course includes that planning element, and making sure that those who are then taken on to perform the work, both on the design side and as contractors, can be procured, selected in the in a reasonable light of the knowledge of what they need to do, so that we do end up with a competent workforce through the initial stages and all the way through to build and completion.
So you use the word there, client brief, and I'm guessing client brief could be for something that is relatively minor, a page, an insight as to what I would like. I'd like a factory that's this big, and I want power and water, and I would like it by this date, at one end of the extreme, all the way through to a substantial tomb, because we're talking of something which is measured in millions of pounds and could of its own right take a fair amount of work to put together.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in the scenario, I mean, we're probably looking at the smaller scale, and obviously whatever's put together needs to be fit for purpose. What it's all about is understanding what it is that client requires, and then building up from there.
Okay.
So it could very well be a very simple document and brief that gets the ball rolling.
So if we then just come back to the principal contractor being appointed where there's more than one contractor. So in a scenario like this, where there is a contractor and he is appointing subcontractors, the concept behind principal contractor would it include the contractors, the subcontractors? So a main contractor appointing subcontractors then triggers the need for a principal contractor.
Well, it does, and also the principal designer as well, as we know. So yeah, I mean, the sort of the one-off and I suppose uninformed or perhaps naive client is probably not going to know of the existence of the CDM regulations at all. So this is why it's important that the designers that are first approached to perhaps put together the scheme do spend some time explaining to the client what's going to be required and how the project might be approached. I mean, it may be approached as a design and build project from the outset. It may be that an outline scheme is drawn up by a designer initially before I get anywhere near thinking about the contractors. But yes, as soon as it's becomes apparent that there's likely to be more than one contractor involved, then those principal appointments of both the PC and the PD need to be made.
And that is then irrespective of the size or nature of the work. So the contractors may be, decorating, painting, decorating, sparky, lower.
Well, that's right. Well, I mean, the reason that we have these appointments is that we have different bodies, different organisations, different individuals sometimes, who need to be coordinated. I mean, that is the function of both of the principals, is that they're ensuring that the information flows are taking place, the information is reaching the people who need to know about that, and that the activities of different professions, trades are properly coordinated. So.
Okay, so
and it all needs it must be proportionate to the job in hand. It's often a very, very straightforward thing to achieve the coordination and the planning. We're not looking at creating huge bundles of paperwork in terms of health and safety plans or whatever else. It's got to be proportionate to the work that's going on and relevant to the work that's going on.
So in terms of helping or supporting a client in this kind of scenario, recognizing we might be talking about a business that doesn't have an in-house health and safety support function, it might be reliant on a consultant who visits on an ad hoc basis. Is there then an opportunity for those kind of individuals to be getting under the skin of the forthcoming works to then offer a sense of direction to prompt a client to go down the right route? And then second, supplementary to that, is it a case that the client can appoint external advisor to help them understand the CDM process?
They can do. Of course, there's nothing stopping them from doing that if they want to. I mean, I think it's important to be clear that there's no requirement in the CDM regulations for a CDM advisor as such. But yes, I mean, I would expect if a firm either has their own in-house health and safety support, or they use, they may well already have access to health and safety advice from a consultant. That in both cases, those consultants or in-house advisors would be assisting that employer, that organisation with an understanding of what needs to happen to comply with CDM.
And supporting somebody to develop their understanding and then move them to a situation where they have enough understanding to go, right, I now need a principal designer, I need a principal contractor, is, rather than a piece set out under CDM, would just be a good management practice. It's not putting the health and safety consultant in a place where they are taking on any of the key roles. It's just,
that's right,
preparing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And therefore, as part of the process, we might encounter the need to do asbestos surveys, and there is a question from somebody around that. So, in terms of the preparatory work, like asbestos surveys, would you see them coming under the auspices of CDM?
Yes, the results of an asbestos survey are often going to be a key part of the pre-construction information. One of the most relevant bits of pre-construction information, I'd suggest. The duty to manage asbestos is an existing duty anyway, so any building owner, occupier, already has that duty to manage the asbestos that they have in their building, which does mean that they should have an awareness of where it is, the condition that it's in, and provide that information to anybody who comes onto site. If there's going to be more significant work planned on a building, then that information may well need to be supplemented. But again, that would be we would expect the client to do that and organise that, and then make that information available.
But in terms of the survey work, for example, archaeological survey work is no longer described in the construction definition, but survey work such as the undertaking, the implementation of the asbestos survey as enabling work or works in advance of the construction activity, because in order to plan, people will need to know whether that's something they need to address. Does that of itself fall under CDM?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstances. I mean, it may be that becomes part of the wider project, or it may be done as a discrete activity in preparation for a subsequent project.
Okay. I'm just trying to scroll through a steady stream of incoming questions to just for a moment. So again, just coming back to that proportionality piece, the construction phase plan for something of this ilk at the lower end, again, I suspect you'll tell me proportionality is the key, and it's more about sharing the key information in an appropriate fashion than reams of paper.
Yes. in a word, I mean, I think in terms of what what needs to be in the construction phase plan, Appendix 3 of the guidance of L whatever it is, 15 something, isn't it? 153. Actually outlines or describes what should be in the plan, and in a sort of job like this, you've got an existing workplace. It's going to have people around. It's going to have its own emergency arrangements in terms of fire evacuation, etc. So a reasonable part of the plan would address those sorts of factors. How the construction staff and the existing site-based staff need to work together, cooperate, and manage those interfaces. The other elements of the plan should be fairly straightforward, whether there's specific site rules that are therefore relevant. How welfare is going to be organised, and so on. And I think where construction plans often do grow a bit out of proportion is that they deal with every possible risk that's been identified, and really that doesn't need to be done. It's only something that's particularly relevant or specific to that site that is an unusual or risks, or one that may not otherwise be recognised. So having a construction phase plan that deals generically with managing falls from height is not helpful. That has to be done on every construction project, and it doesn't need to be in a specific plan. But on the other hand, if you've got some particularly unusual method of construction, building finish, which may not have been encountered before, then you would expect that to be addressed in the plan.
Okay, thank you. And taking a couple of the questions that I can see in front of me that are construction phase plan related, somebody out in the big wide world is asking, can I ask, in connection with the changes, who now assesses the construction phase plan? And I'm guessing that's saying who says this document is suitable, is adequate.
Well, that's the responsibility of the principal contractor. They have to put the plan together using the information that they've been provided with. There's a duty on the client to make sure that there is a plan, but the client doesn't have a responsibility to vet it in any way. So it is very much the duty of the principal contractor to make sure that it's fit for purpose.
Okay. Just then, and there are lots of questions coming through that talk about repair and maintenance. That is clearly of interest to a substantial part of the audience. And there are illustrations, there are questions out there from people who are on frameworks for planned preventative maintenance. There are questions from people who are talking about, well, actually we just do a few bits and pieces en route. So if you were thinking of, and for me this is an interpretation, maintenance, I guess there are two subtly different aspects. One is planned preventative maintenance work, and the other is the reactive maintenance. It's broke today, I need to try and fix it pretty quickly tomorrow. What would your view be on what an appropriate construction phase plan might look like? I'm guessing we're talking about a framework, so we have some site, or we have a plan of work that we can identify what's appropriate in the planned maintenance scenario.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, again, looking back at what the content of a construction phase plan needs to be, there are certain things which are fairly general to the range of buildings and that are going to be covered potentially by that overall plan. And there are going to be some things that are very specific to the job in hand. So at one end of the scale, you could have what I think is probably used at the moment, where people have job cards which describe what it is that needs to be done on that day, and any particular piece of information that would be relevant to that site. So whether that would be an access issue, whether it would be, I don't know, the presence of of asbestos in that location, if it's so it's a housing association repair, and you've got asbestos containing soffits. There will be certain relevant pieces of information that need to be communicated to the individual or team that are going out to do that, and that I would suggest that people use their existing management systems, management arrangements for making sure that information is properly communicated, because that's really what what we're trying to achieve with this is. It's all about planning the work so that it can be undertaken with the risk managed.
So what I'm taking out of that is the construction phase plan is the overarching view of safe work, which then has some specific content for the individual repairs, be it a job card, be it a call-out record that says, construction phase plan, we've got some work at heights we're going to do under the framework, we'll typically do it like this, and then the job card says, on plot 6, you need a properly erected tower scaffold, 2 painters, and the kind of issues associated with it are X, Y, Z. That content might then be capable of being reused if there's a similar task reallocated on another plot on another day, so you don't have to write new work every time you do a similar task, but it's slots in beneath that overarching framework.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. I mean, as I say, if people have existing systems, and it might be the job card type approach, then they should continue using that, and that will fulfil the the need for the plan.
And does that then similarly provide the principle for dealing with reactive maintenance, in the sense of it's only this morning when the sewer bursts or the water pipe bursts in the cold weather that there should be an expectation that these kind of things can happen, and then it's a case of adding the specific local detail to deal with that scenario?
Yeah, and I think again, many contractors have developed over the years their point of work risk assessment systems and all manner of schemes. So yeah, and I don't nothing in CDM 2015 should be changing the way those sorts of jobs have been approached in the past. We're not looking for a sort of an administrative compliance approach. We're looking for the management of risk, and if people were managing the risks that arise from these emergency jobs in the past successfully, then there's no reason why they can't continue to do that using the same sort of arrangements.
Okay, and therefore, if you have this maintenance regime, and it's likely to involve multiple contractors, so you've got a 3-year framework and it involves multiple contractors, then the principal designer and the principal contractor come into play.
They do, yeah. Or they could do, yes.
So again, I'm interpreting the view of, again, it's very much focused about planning what work could be likely, and structuring something to cover that efficiently in the event that it then is needed.
Yeah, and I think, yes, where you've got more than one contractor involved in these sorts of contracts, and of course you often will, because you'll have different trades need to go out and do different things. So yes, you then need a principal designer appointed, but I would expect that that function, the very limited design function that goes into that sort of work, could be easily discharged by the principal contractor without the need to appoint a further organisation to take that on.
Okay, thank you. So then, just again picking off a particular question which has a crossover into repair and maintenance. My company carries out insurance repair works. We put back like for like work. Where does the PD sit in this, as we are the PC?
So we've got
for a company that is doing insurance repair work, and they have a role as PC. Yeah. I think there's a question here saying, does there need to be a PD, a principal designer, appointed? I guess there's lots of questions to ask. Who's the client? Is the client the insurance company, or is the client the individual company householder who needs repair work doing?
Yeah. Well, in that situation, yes. I suppose if you've got a sort of a framework agreement where you are in effect acting as a principal contractor, because you're organising a number of different contractors to go to different jobs at different times. Yes, there would, in theory, the requirement for well, not in theory, in practice, the requirement for the PD is triggered. But again, it's the same sort of similar situation as the one we were just discussing on these longer-term maintenance contracts. That the PC organisation should have the skills, knowledge, experience, etc. to organisational capability to discharge the principal designer function without any difficulty at all. So that should be covered by that. I mean, whether, again, it's a question of whether you consider that as one project or whether it's actually a multitude of different contracts. I mean, I think you could interpret that either way, quite honestly.
And that interpretation is something that falls to the organisations that are involved in the construction process.
Yeah.
And provided the interpretation and the practice reasonably match, would that suggest then that it would be a reasonable interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, what is it that we're really wanting to address in that situation? It is, clearly people want to know that they are complying with the requirements that are out there. They're not falling foul of the law. But in terms of what the expectations would be, yes, for all of these individual insurance repair jobs and so on, there would need to be a construction phase plan for the work that is being done. But as we've just been discussing, that can be organised, fulfilled on a very straightforward basis, and the other responsibilities of a PC to coordinate and what have you, really aren't coming into play, because you've got perhaps one tradesman's being sent to one property to do something very simple, I think I don't think we should get too concerned about some of these other aspects of the regulations that the place duties which in effect aren't really very significant duties in the situation that we're talking about.
Okay, that's useful. And in the same vein, I think I can stab at this one. Is a reactive maintenance contract with a housing association for a 5-year contract notifiable?
I think you can interpret it either way. You could probably say, well, yeah, we anticipate having a certain number of person days construction over that period. So yeah, within a notification at the outset. As I said earlier, I mean the notification doesn't trigger any other duties. So it's whether it's notified or not is nobody's going to be losing sleep over, to be honest.
And what goes with that particular question is one that also goes on to say, do I have to make the client aware of this? No principal contractor has been appointed. So it sounds like there might be a little bit of tidy up to go with that.
Well, I mean, presumably whoever the organisation is that's got this contract is going to be the principal contractor. Can't really not be. If they're organising a number of other contractors to do various bits of work over a 3-year period. I mean, that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
It is very much so. And in that same vein, and the planning and the preparation, I can see a question that asked, has guidance been provided in the format or in relation to the format information included in the pre-construction information pack, so that there is consistency? I've just lost the question. So there's consistency.
It's the only guidance that there is on health and safety plans. There's what's in the L series publication, which describes what the content needs to be. Excuse me. And we have HSC produced a template for very simple and straightforward jobs. That was adapted by colleagues at CITB into an application which is downloadable to smartphones. I'm not sure whether they've got to yet on a desktop version, whether that's available, but in essence that guides you through the sorts of considerations and questions that you should be asking yourself in that planning process. So I would suggest that for small, straightforward projects, those are the most suitable pieces of guidance.
Okay, and I think when we get to our summary slide, there are reminders around things like that app. There are a couple of questions, Simon, of people just coming back on the comments made about the construction phase plan and the review, to which somebody is asking, doesn't the PD have a responsibility to review the construction phase plan to ensure the pre-construction information has been interpreted correctly, stroke incorporated into the plan?
I'll have to go back and check. You want to move on to another one while
we were talking a few moments ago about the maintenance, the insurance-driven repair and replacement work, and there's been a follow-up that would just suggest that the client is an insurance company. So I would suspect that, a practical approach would be to put something over the top as an overarching plan to say how these kinds of work are dealt with even.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, the point that we have to keep coming back to is that these regulations provide a flexible framework. They're not, they don't dictate exactly how you should manage risk on projects. They provide a framework which does require that a certain number of things need to be achieved. Planning, coordination, management of risk is the key thing behind that. And so what in all of these different sort of situations, what duty holders need to do, what organisations need to do, is to do what works for them and come up with a set of arrangements that yes, fulfills the requirement, but more importantly, actually achieves the goal which the regulations set down.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to move on then and just talk briefly around CDM, the whole thing's about CDM, design and build, and how you see that works in the sense the principal contractor. Can the principal contractor have the multiple duty so that he can be principal contractor and then also take on board the design and the principal designer role under the auspices of a design build contract, so that
yes,
one party picks up it all?
It can, yeah. I mean, what you would often anticipate happening in a design and build situation is that initial work might have been carried out on feasibility and to go through planning and so on, which will have involved a designer or designers, and so the principal designer appointment may well pass from those involved in the early stages to then the design and build contractor, who then subsequently takes on and develops that project, and they would then fulfil both the principal contractor and principal designer roles, and they wouldn't have responsibility for the design decisions and what have you that were taken in the early stages, but we would expect that there would be a review of what's gone on before, and good coordination, cooperation with the first appointed principal designer. What you can't have is two principal designers appointed at the same time. It has to go from one to the other. Okay, yeah.
So I'm just going to have a quick look at a few of the questions and try and spend the last 15 minutes or so dealing with individual questions. And just coming straight off the top of the list, how does CDM cover maintenance work on a factory who has its own workforce and contractors? So I guess this is, the handyman being involved in doing some maintenance and repair work. And I guess he gets picked up, and that process gets picked up under CDM.
They do, yes. In effect, I mean, they are doing construction work. They can be doing construction work. I mean, I think it's important to draw the distinction between what is genuine maintenance, changing tap washers and light bulbs, and so on, doing bits of lubrication here and there, and what becomes a piece of construction work. But yes, I mean, if it's a more involved with going out repairing the roof, or they're completely redecorating and doing a lot of external work on a building and so on, then that is construction work, and they would need to follow the principles and comply with the regulations in a fit for purpose way.
Can a health and safety consultant / advisory company, which is not carrying out any construction work, act as PC?
No.
And is that on the basis of knowledge and experience of the construction process and the construction activity?
They have to be doing work. They have to be in control of and doing and directing that work to be a contractor. and therefore a principal contractor.
So a bit like designers' connection to principal designer, you've got to be a designer to be a principal designer. You've got to be a contractor to be a principal contractor. I think this is very much a similar question. A manufacturing company has its own team of tradesmen who carry out excavation and minor building repair work on its site. Does CDM apply?
Yeah.
Because it fits the definition of construction work. There are one or two questions asking what's wrong with, or what was wrong with CDM 2007, but unfortunately that's not where we're headed for the discussions today. The new regulations are with us, and I'm afraid we're going to keep our attention on the new regulations. Do you have any criteria or suggestion on how a principal designer or principal designer stroke principal contractor can satisfy themselves that the client is aware of their duties under the new regulations?
Well, I think if there's a conversation with the client, then that should become apparent. I'm not sure where we're going with that one. I mean, yes, I think that would be very, should be straightforward to determine whether the client A, knows of the existence of the regulations and has a reasonable understanding of what they're designed to achieve.
And therefore it would just be a discussion that says, you want me to start work as your contractor, are you familiar with this and this is what you need to do?
Yeah.
A confirmatory response would suggest they're on the right path. Ooh, how long you got for this one? As designers are not health and safety practitioners in the main, has the removal of the CDM role not diluted the implementation of CDM?
No, well, I think the challenge, and that it's right that there is a challenge here for the design profession as a whole. Designers have these duties. They've had a duty for a long time to consider risks in their designs and eliminate, reduce as far as possible, and then provide information. That we've had that duty for a long time, and that's unchanged in the new regulations. What we've now got is a situation where one of those designers now needs to take on a responsibility for coordinating the information that's coming out of the others, and to some extent, provide a challenge function to some of those decisions. So I think the duty has always been there. The fact that we've now got principal designers being appointed means that it's brought it into a sharper focus, and it's undoubtedly the case that there is some extra work for some design organisations, design individuals, to get up to speed on how construction risks arise in build and or from the design process, and how they can be managed and mitigated.
That's a very interesting follow-up to our comment about if you need to be a contractor to be a principal contractor and a designer to be a principal designer. If you have to be a designer to be a principal designer, how does it work when the client doesn't appoint a principal contractor and then by default takes on that responsibility?
Well, clients can put themselves into a difficult position where they do that, because they yeah, they take on those responsibilities. And if they're doing that intentionally, then they need to be advised that they need to have the capability to do that. But you can't really do more than that, I would suggest.
Okay. My company currently acts as PC and PD on design and build works. There is a degree of ambiguity in this area from the revised regulations. It seems as though impartiality may be lost. Do you have a view on whether that's of concern or not?
No, I don't think it is a concern, because one of the drawbacks really to the old system where we had independent organisations and individuals appointed as a CDMC was that they had often insufficient influence over the process because they weren't part of the team. And the point is, the duties exist, and those duties, now that they are being met, or should be being met by those appointed from amongst the design team, or a body from amongst the design team, then there's a far better chance for that exchange of information and coordination work to go on, because for the very fact that they are embedded in there. And we shouldn't see this either as a some sort of competition between a PD and a PC role. It's a situation where we're expecting cooperation between those two in terms of the information flows and ensuring that these the information is both identified, processed and disseminated to where it needs to be. So it is a collaborative approach, rather than something where we've got one kind of looking over the shoulder of another.
Okay. Somebody obviously very focused on the new regulations. Have there been any enforcements under CDM 2015? Do you know if it's been used in anger, whether it's as an enforcement, as a notice, or?
I don't have figures for it, but I think almost certainly there will have been some enforcement notices. There will have been notifications of contravention, which are where we put into writing without an enforcement notice a problem that we've come across on site. So yes, I would be amazed if we haven't, but I don't have the detail of what we have and haven't enforced on to date.
Okay. And therefore, the final question for today would be, and it's forward-looking, what are the HSE CDM focus areas for intervention, both short-term and long-term?
Well, our priorities haven't changed with the new regulations, and we've had a program for a number of years now where we've segmented really into three areas. So asbestos, removal of asbestos by licensed contractors is really our sort of top inspection priority. We also have concerns, continuing concerns about smaller projects and the refurbishment industry more generally. So we put the lion's share of our day-to-day inspection resource into those areas, and have just done an annual campaign on refurbishment, which no doubt you will have seen reported. And then the third area really is the sort of the better organised end of the industry, where we're intervening at more at head office level to provide a bit of a challenge function. And then, we also work more broadly with the industry in trying to improve standards and get the messages out there, really, and through things like working well together. So inspection priorities, very much the smaller projects and refurbishment are still the top thing, along with the asbestos inspection.
Okay, thank you for that. I've just put what in effect is the final slide up, just to remind people of the sources of information that are available out there around CDM Regulations 2015. That which is available at the HSE website, the L Series guidance, and their frequently asked questions that are getting supplemented from time to time as topics become evident. A number of those are also on the IOSH Construction Group web pages, and then of course through the CITB you can access the construction phase plan app, a useful short YouTube video particularly aimed at those that aren't familiar with CDM in any of its previous iterations, and then also access the industry guidance that was published alongside the L series and the regulations earlier this year. There are plenty of questions that are still on the screen that I will go and lock the door so Simon can't get away, and we will get those with the slides up onto the website in the coming days. I'd just like to say thank you, hope it's been of use. If there is feedback, you can always go to the construction group page and advise your thoughts via the Contact Us facility. So thank you, have a safe afternoon.